All right, gang. Welcome aboard once again. It's time for the weekly. All right, welcome aboard. Time once again for the weekly Mac Forum video chat. Hope that you find the information that we're going to present to you today very interesting. Let's go ahead and dive right in. I've got quite a few things and want to make sure we get to all of them. Excuse that little bit of background noise there. All right, first of all, let's dive right into something that everyone who is running Mac OS Sierra, High Sierra needs to be aware of. There is a documented security flaw. Let me get up to the top of the page here. We've got a thread going on. A security bug or flaw in Mac OS High Sierra, which everybody that's running High Sierra needs to know about and take some pretty basic steps to address. The bug was originally described at MacRumors website, was discovered by a developer named Lemmy Ergin, and the flaw makes it possible for someone to log into an administrator account using the root username and no password. Now, that was reported earlier this week. By now, Apple has released a security fix, a patch with a fix. Here you can see the MacRumors site with the article describing it. Apple has released a patch that fixes the issue. You can also address this issue if you're not able to install the patch right now. I've got a link to a 9 to 5 Mac article telling you how to reset the root password. Set yourself up a strong password for the root user so that this kind of stuff will not work. Now, Apple's patch, they had one out in very short order. The first version of the patch introduced a flaw or a bug in file sharing and some of the sharing issues. Okay, so what you're going to need is you're going to want to look at the security patch. Now, the current version that's up fixes that issue. Okay, I have a link to an iMore article, website article, that gives you the correct version number of the patch. The newest version of the patch is 17B, as in boy, 1002. The previously released patch, which fixed the security bug, introduced some issues with file sharing and caused a few problems there. So they have since fixed that. If you have gotten version 17B 1002 of the security patch, you should be good to go. My thinking also on this, for what it's worth, and I'm not a security genius, but my thinking on this is also that you want to make sure that you have a good, strong password on the root account. Now, why is root important? In the Unix world, which is OS 10, Mac OS is based on Unix. There are several varieties of Unix, but they all have a couple things in common. One of them being different users have different levels of permissions. For example, the Mac equivalent would be if you're running in a administrator account, you can install software. If you're running in a standard or guest account, you can't install software without putting in the password for an administrator account. That's just one example of a situation where passwords and permissions come into play. Well, the root user basically is, he's sometimes referred to as the God user in the Unix world. The root user can basically do whatever they want to do to the system. Okay, that's why you want to have a password, a good, strong password on the root user. I can count I've been using Macs for a couple of decades now. Take that literally. That was not a slip of the tongue. I do mean a couple of decades, okay? I am that old. I have been using Macs since the LC2s. I've actually used a Mac Plus and a couple other older machines. So that tells you how far back I've been around. You want to find out how long ago that was, Google the LC2 and see when it came out. That'll give you some idea how long I've been using a Mac. Before that, I used an Apple II GS. So I've been around this kind of stuff for a little while. And one of the things I want to tell you, in all that time, I have only had a handful of instances, and I do mean a handful, where I've had to log into the root user on my Mac to do something. It was usually to clean up some massive issue that came into play, something that I had caused. Okay, and no, you will never hear me admit that on air again. So you better record this one if you want that on record, guys. Usually, if I need to enable the root user to clean up something, it's a mess that I've made. But I'll never say that again in public. Okay, so that's it. But my point is, because you have very little need to log into the root user in most circumstances, most people forget that you can even do it. So I put the link to that 9 to 5 Mac article because I want you to be aware of how to change that password and give yourself a good, strong root user password. Even if you already applied the security fix that Apple has put in place, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and set up a good, strong password on the root user. All right. Now, let's see. We have here, I'll show you, and here is the iMore article with the patch number and some other information on how to identify if you've got the most current version of the patch. If you are still running Sierra, Mac OS Sierra, this bug does not apply to you. It also does not apply to earlier versions of the operating system. This is specific to High Sierra. This security update, as you can see from this iMore article, was released November 29th so that puts us this week. As I say, they jumped on this real quickly. This was identified on, I believe, Tuesday, and by the 29th, they had the first patch out, which that, of course, was the patch that introduced some file sharing bugs, and the second patch, the one that I mentioned, that's identified as 17B1002, has since taken care of those. So you want to make sure that that's the patch that you get, and you'll be taken care of there. All right. Now, because of the security issues, one of our Mac Forum members was experiencing some issues with the Apple Watch. Some unusual behavior or some atypical behavior for them, and wanted to know if the problem that they were seeing was as a result of or a side effect of the security bug that's affecting High Sierra. And in reality, probably not, simply because the operating system on the Apple Watch and the operating system on the Mac are two very, very different things right now. You can't take software or commands, for example, that run on the Mac and run them on the watch, for example. So that's an issue that you're not going to have with the Apple Watch. I am not sure what caused the problem this particular user was happening, but it wasn't due to this security bug that you see with High Sierra. All right, now on a side note, by the way, on a side note, sometimes you see all kinds of weird things on the internet, and I will point this out to you. I used to frequent a website called Mac OS X Hints, and there was a link one time to a post on that site. A post on that site had a link to a guy claiming that he had gotten the Mac operating system, whatever was current at the time, running on an iPad. Not on an iPad, excuse me, an iPod. This predates the iPad. He posted, and he had a little picture of an iPod with, I believe it was one of the second or third generation iPods, and he had a picture of the little Mac OS smiley face. And I clicked on the link because I have to tell you, without really thinking about it, I clicked on the link because I wanted to find out if it was true. And the reason I wanted to find out if it was true is I had an iPod laying around that we weren't using. And if I could have put the OS on there and used it as a boot drive for emergency purposes, I would have given it a try. It seemed to me like a good thing to try if it could be done. And it's just later when I read through the comments in detail that I discovered two things. One was it was an April Fool's joke, and when you looked at if you look carefully at the post date, you notice that it was April Fool's Day when he posted this. And two, one of the other members pointed out that you couldn't do that because of differences in the operating systems and the software. Now, had I been thinking before I clicked on the link, I wouldn't have even bothered wasting my time with the 5 minutes it took to read the information, because you literally could not do that at that time because of differences in the operating systems, capacities of the iPod, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So keep in mind when you see things on the internet, what you see is not always accurate. All right, now another idea that I wanted to bring to you this week has to do with syncing of your messages, iMessage content, and how to keep them in sync across multiple devices so that when you delete one on one device, that gets propagated through all of the others. When you receive one on one device, it gets propagated through all of the others. I'm having an issue with that right now. There are a couple of settings on my Mac that I need to adjust. I'm not sure what's going on there. Things like handoff and a couple other things. Some of the settings have gotten borked up, so I'm going to have to take a look at that. But for most people, if you have a look at this thread, pay particular attention to post number 2 from our administrator. As you can see there, Chaskag, he's got the solution that will fix this for most people. Let me scroll down here and get to, I did a little quick screen capture on my phone of how to do this. Let me go ahead and bring that up. It'll take just a second. I want to be sure that I pull up the right movie. Let's hope this is the right one. Okay, it's being a little ornery, so let's go back to the site. All right. Let's see. Well, where did it get saved to? Here we go. All right. There we go. This is the one I was looking for. What you need to do is a setting that you want to be sure you check. You're going to go and watch. I'll comment on the movie as we go along here. What you want to do is open Settings, and you're going to scroll down until you get to Messages. All right, you're going to tap there, and then you want to scroll through until you get to this setting, text message forwarding, and it's going to show you a list of text devices that you could use, and then you want to enable that device. That's going to take care of that issue for you, and or in most cases. And then, as you can see, I'm double checking here. It's off now, but you turn it on. You would click right there, and you're all set to go. And you can, when you go back, you will see that there are some other text messaging settings that you can experiment with here to get the device behaving the way you want it to. But that's just a real quick fix for a lot of message syncing issues that some people have. It cured it for it cures a lot of the issues for me. So that's one that you want to keep available to you and keep that in your bag of tricks. All right, now let's move right along. And I want to point out here, now that we've gotten past most of our tips, this is a feature from Roman Loyola, senior editor at Macworld, but this article, as you can see, comes from Tech Connect. And it deals with how to shop at the Apple certified refurbished store and save yourself some money on Apple gear. Now, one thing I want to be sure and point out, there are other places to get refurbished Apple gear. There are several third-party vendors that have refurbished gear. And if you're going to buy from one of them, and I'm not saying they're bad companies, make sure you understand what you're getting, and particularly how long the warranty is. Some of these vendors, when you buy a refurbished product from them, they have a shorter warranty than the Apple gear. When you buy from the Apple store, from the Apple certified refurb store, that device, whether it be a phone, an iMac, a MacBook Pro, anything like that, it's been checked out, double checked, triple checked, and has the same warranty, same guarantees as if you had bought it spank brand new. Okay, that's has always been the case. Now, if you are looking, here's the catch, and there are a couple things you need to remember about looking in the Apple refurbished store. First of all, one great time to look is right after a new model has been released. So, for example, when the iPhone 10 was released recently, you probably could find some pretty decent deals on the 6S and the 7S as people upgraded their stuff. And also another tip, and there are a few others mentioned in this article, but just one that I want people to be aware of, is you want to check back regularly. In other words, if you're looking for an iMac, they may not have the configuration you want today, but 2 or 3 days later, they might, because something got returned, etc., etc., etc. Now, you'll find more selection if you're looking for just sort of the generic configurations. If you're looking for something that's kind of a specific or a custom build-to-order kind of thing, you see less and less of those, but it's always worth a look. And if you just need a good workhorse machine and you're not too terribly worried about a build-to-order or a custom setup, do take a look at those. Also, if you don't already know, take a look at the find somebody that can help you if you're not real good with the tech specs, because well, let's just take an example of something that can easily slip by you. If you're buying a Mac, for example, and it has 8 GB of RAM, and you're thinking to yourself, well, I can put in another 8 GB later when funds get a little bit better. That's true on some models, not true on others. So you would want to check out things like that. But having said that, if you're careful, you can find some pretty good deals in the Apple refurbished area. Be sure to check regularly, and there are a few other tips and some examples in this article as well. All right, and then finally, I have to admit, this did not occur to me until I read the headline of the article, and it was in response to a post on the forum. Someone asked a question about using browsing the web on the Apple TV. And in a stock configuration, the Apple TV does not have a web browser built into it. So I started looking around, and I ran into this particular article from Macworld. And I believe this is the Macworld UK website specifically. And it gives you some ideas of ways that you can surf the web on the Apple TV. One of them is kind of indirectly. And by indirectly, I mean what you're actually doing is you're surfing the web on your phone, your iOS device, or your Mac, but the picture is being reflected over to the Apple TV using AirPlay. That's one way to do it. It's fairly simple to set up and get going, but some people find it inconvenient that you're actually doing the typing and everything on either your Mac keyboard or the keyboard on your iPhone. Another possibility is there's a piece of software mentioned in this article. Let's see. Let me scroll down a little bit farther and I'll see if I see the name again. There's some setup tips for using AirPlay. The second one involves using a program called Air Browser on your phone. And what it does is not only reflect your browser from your phone or your iOS device to the Apple TV, but also places some controls on the phone screen so you can do things like scrolling the web page a little bit easier. That's still not quite the same as having a web browser on the Apple TV, but it's one option. There is a third option discussed in this article, and it involves loading a web browser, an open source web browser, but the process is not for the faint of heart, so to speak, to put it that way. It takes a little bit of work. So right now, you're kind of left with using AirPlay. I think that with the advent of the Apple TV 4, as more and more things open up on Apple TV, you're probably going to see more options in terms of web browsing. So keep that in mind as you are looking for things that you can do with your Apple TV. Wanted to be dead sure that I mentioned that one to you, because that does come up from time to time. I haven't experimented with that a whole lot because my Mac happens to be in the same room as the TV, and I don't often want to really look at a web page on the TV screen because our TV screen doesn't have as good a resolution as my monitor does. And to be honest with you, some websites just do not look good on a TV screen. Even with a really good screen, you've got some issues. So it's an option. It's useful to know how to do it, but don't be surprised if the performance is not quite what you expect it to be, especially on some sites. So that's going to do it for that particular tip. And that takes care of our tip bag for this week, tips and tricks. I want to be sure that I mention a couple things to you that are coming up. First of all, probably next Sunday, I'll talk a little bit about what to do with older Mac and iOS gear, some things that you might be able to do with them, including some preparation steps that you need to take if you're going to be either donating it to a charitable organization or donating it to a relative, anything of that nature. I'll talk about some steps that you need to be sure you take. We'll also I'll give you some thoughts about how not to, some things that you might not want to donate. Just as a for example, to give you an idea of what I'm thinking about. There are Mac users that still have PowerPC gear laying around, and they're using it, and they've given some thought to, okay, I can pass this on. Well, having a PowerPC based Mac is better than nothing at all. But if you're passing that on to someone and thinking in terms of that's going to give them a good introduction to the Mac ecosystem and Apple gear, it's not going to be a good introduction because it is so outdated. Okay. Once you reach a point where you have that much difficulty finding software and keeping an OS up to date, that doesn't give a good impression of what the Apple ecosystem is all about. And there would be a lot of things that they just would not be able to do. So we'll talk about some things like that, as well as some other issues with passing that kind of gear on. And that'll hopefully, if you're thinking about being Santa Claus for someone, that'll give you some ideas about both in terms of things you can do and how to set things up so that everything goes smoothly. So we'll talk about that next week in some depth. And maybe there'll be some other interesting things going on the forum. There usually are. We'll talk about those as well. That's going to just about do it for this week, guys. This has been your host, Sylvester Rock, aka Sly Dude on the forum. Didn't take as long to go through this week's tips, mainly because we talked about the security settings a little bit more. But I want to be sure that you remember that during the week, you can post a question in the show thread. The show notes with links to everything should be up in a few minutes, barring unforeseen disasters of one kind or another. And until next week, this has been your host, Sylvester Rock, aka Sly Dude. I'll see you in the forum, guys.